Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast, raising awareness and inspiring action for personal and planetary health, with your hosts, Ben and Emma.
Hello everybody, my name is Ben Eidelberg.
And I'm Emma Strutt.
And welcome to episode 30. Firstly, as always, in your podcast app, please make sure that you are subscribed to this podcast and also share it with friends and family. Now, we have been made aware of something that we absolutely did not realize, but apparently our hyperlinks do not come through onto the various podcast platforms, which means if you want to access any of the website links or papers or any other supporting documents that we always tell you we put in our show notes, you need to visit our website and you will find everything in the podcast show notes on there. Also, while you're on,
we do it.
we really do. So a little bit of an inconvenience. It's obviously easier to listen to these on your podcast app, but if you do need to access any of the show notes, please go to our website. And while you're there, sign up to the newsletter and buy us a few coffees too, please. So not long ago, we had Grant Dixon, Chairman of the Evidence-Based Eating New Zealand, tell us all about their series of health-focused public lectures that they are currently delivering nationwide. Round one was in Dunedin, and we played those audios back in episodes 18, 19, and 20. And now we have round two from Dunedin.
That's right. So we kick things off with a previous guest of the podcast, actually, the wonderful Dr. Martyn Williamson. Martyn is a GP from Alexandra and a senior lecturer in the Department of General Practice and Rural Health at the University of Otago. Martyn is also co-founder of Livestrong Health with his lovely wife Liz and is a committee member of Evidence-Based Eating New Zealand. In this lecture, Martyn discusses medical training and why holistic nutrition is a better place to start for avoiding illness. And as a reminder, if you like what you hear, please check out the EBE website to find out more details of their upcoming events in Auckland and Wellington.
The title of my talk is Avoiding and Treating Illness with a Plant-Based Diet. And as a GP, my interest is really was piqued by the treating aspect of this, because that's what I was actually involved with in day-to-day work and seeing patients. What are we going to cover tonight? Well, we're going to have a look at whole food plant-based nutrition, just a quick look to let you know what it actually is. And then you'll hear about some of the ranges of diseases that we can either prevent, reverse, or even cure with whole food plant-based nutrition. Then we're going to have a look at the role of reductionism in medicine and research, and have a little look at this through the lens of my own journey in medicine. So, whole food plant-based nutrition is pretty simple. It's eating fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices, all foods which have been shown to promote health. I don't think I've come across a study which has had shown a negative impact of any of those foods. And it's literally that's what this way of eating is about, just those foods only. Those that have attended a talk from me before might have seen these slides, but I thought I would differentiate whole food plant-based nutrition from vegan, because although it's vegan compatible, it's not the same. So on this slide, these foods here are all vegan compatible. There's no animal foods at all in here, but they're not all healthy. And just take a moment to have a look and see if you can identify which ones you think are healthy and which ones aren't. Because I'm now going to remove the ones that aren't part of whole food plant-based nutrition. So that's what we're left with. And I'm now going to add in a whole range of other stuff which is compatible with what we're talking about. So if you are vegan, these foods are what you should be eating if you want to try and achieve the best of health. And here are some of the meals that you can make from them. And whenever I look at this slide, my mouth just waters. It's a riot of colour, and it's so attractive to look at. So that's what whole food plant-based nutrition is. Here's another way of looking at it, that if you actually, I think there's probably a version of the traffic light system in Peter and Catherine's magazine. This is commonly used amongst people who talk about whole food plant-based nutrition, this traffic light system. So if it's red light, then you avoid it if at all possible. So the foods there should make sense to everybody, really. Yellow light is go cautiously. So here we include high-fat foods such as the fake meats, which are mostly useful in my view if you're transitioning towards this way of eating. But they contain oils, salts, and food made by food companies basically, so they make them in such a way to make you want to eat more of them, which usually means they're not going to contribute to your health. In fact, they're going to have the opposite effect. Alcohol could well be up in the red. Basically, I don't think there's a proven health benefit of alcohol, and there's plenty of negative effects from it, not the least it increases your risk of cancer, particularly if you're a woman and with breast cancer. Coffee has some pros and cons. Some research has come out recently saying be careful if you're pregnant, and if you're going to have coffee and you like drinking a lot of coffee, I suggest you go decaf, and it's caffeine in itself and doesn't do us necessarily any good. Then the plant-based foods, so tempeh, tofu, avocado, nuts, seeds, plant-based milks, they're probably a wee bit higher in fat than most plant foods, which is why they're in the yellow. So particularly important if people are trying to lose a little bit of weight. Green foods you can eat as much as you like. So that's all vegetables, fruits, grains, whole grains, starches, spices and herbs, and particularly leafy greens. So I thought we'd have a quick look at the New Zealand context, which I think Jim is, when he talks, is probably going to say a lot more about than this, but it's important to recognise the context. 30% of adults are obese, so that's a frightening number. 1 in 4 have more than one chronic disease. I find that really startling. But so prevalence of type 2 diabetes, 5% and rising. With that 30% of adults being obese, that's kind of the forerunner to this going up rapidly. And diabetes is the condition that costs this country the most in terms of healthcare. So that's our life expectancy. That's pretty good, isn't it? That's the healthy life expectancy. So at the moment, on average, we've got 10 years of living with chronic disease that we possibly don't need to have. Because best estimates are around that 80% of chronic or non-communicable diseases are related to lifestyle factors, and lifestyle factors are things that we can actually do something about. And as a result of all of this, our health service is actually struggling to cope. So we're going to have a quick look at some of the diseases. Grant's already shown a slide, and I think the stuff that I've got here is the same. So ischemic heart disease, vascular disease, type 2 diabetes, overweight and obesity. There's something about me that hates to call that a disease, actually. All of those, there's actually trial evidence for whole food plant-based nutrition, or something pretty close, making a difference. That's including inflammatory bowel disease, which kind of surprised me because we're taught the opposite in medical school. And yet there's some small trials that have shown they have a change in nutrition can have a really significant result, better than that obtained by the best medications that we've got. Other autoimmune diseases, I'm not sure about trial data here, but there's certainly plenty of case histories, and there's research underway. Osteoarthritis. The anti-inflammatory effect of plant-based diets can result in a reduction in pain. So as long as you haven't got any other cause of your osteoarthritis, some abnormality of the joint, for example, then if you eat an anti-inflammatory diet, you're certainly going to do a lot better. The evidence around cancer is more in terms of reduction in risk or prevention, particularly breast, bowel and prostate. There is some evidence that nutrition and lifestyle factors can influence early prostate cancer, but that's as far as it goes at the moment. But certainly if you have cancer and you eat a healthy diet, you're going to improve, and there's studies showing this particularly in breast cancer, you're going to improve your chances of making a good recovery. Alzheimer's disease, so a lot of us are worried about that. You can make inroads into your likelihood of Alzheimer's disease. And I put this one in because this really surprised me. Conditions related to women's health. The data that I'd come across until just a few weeks ago was people had noticed this effect in doing other trials, that it improved symptoms with a condition called endometriosis, which is a kind of intractable, painful periods it's really hard for us in the medical profession to deal with, and it's not dealt with well. And amazingly, if you eat a plant-based diet, you can actually have dramatic improvements. And I've had a patient who's living that result. Polycystic ovary syndrome related to diabetes, in the sense that it's related to insulin resistance. Menopausal symptoms, believe it or not, can also be dramatically reduced. Just recently a trial's come out showing a substantial reduction in hot flushes for women in I think it was a crossover trial who went on to 2 weeks of a plant-based diet. And similar reduction in period pains being noticed in other studies. So onto reductionism in science and in medicine. So this is just a diagram. You've probably all heard of this. You can't see the wood for the trees. So what happens when we want to understand something in science, and it's been this way since the scientific revolution basically, is we look closely at the makeup of things to actually understand how they work. So when we're in the wood, we actually study the trees, because if we understand the tree and the trees, we can then understand the wood. That's how this works. And it's brought some tremendous advances that we're all well aware of in our life today, but it brings with it some disadvantages. Here's another way of looking at it: it's the blind man and the elephant. So when we look at an elephant, if we start looking too closely, we might think, oh, it's a tree because we're looking at the leg, or someone else is looking at the abdomen and think they're dealing with a wall. So we have to use models to operate in life, and models are really metaphors that we have for describing reality. Once we've got one, they actually tend to determine what we notice, which means that they tend to generate their own verification by excluding phenomena outside their frame of reference. So it's confirmation bias in a sense. So we have a picture of the world and we see the world in terms of that picture, is what this is about. Models are indispensable. Okay, we couldn't function without them, but hazardous because we can mistake them for reality. Well, not because they can be, we do mistake them for reality, rather than a way of organising that reality, and that leads us into some traps. So that's what this is about: reification of abstractions. Reification is just making something real. So we have an abstract notion. And at the moment we have the problem, in my view, of regarding diseases as things. Now this quote there, which you're having a read of, is from Virchow, who was an eminent physician in the 19th century. And he was actually here arguing against the germ theory of disease. But I've included this quote because I think it's pertinent to what we're talking about today. And that bit that's bolded is that diseases, neither self-subsistent, circumscribed, autonomous organisms or entities that have forced their way into the body. Heart disease doesn't exist out there and get into my body. neither does diabetes, neither does cancer. And Virchow said they represent only the course of physiological phenomena under altered conditions, which fits, if you think, with the concept of lifestyle factors. So lifestyle factors, if they're negative, are insults to the body, and eventually we get a response to it, which we're calling a disease. So how did this impact on me in my career? Well, when I was at medical school, I had to believe, to actually get through it, that diseases like ischemic heart disease and type 2 diabetes were inevitable. It seemed to be that human beings were somehow designed to become diseased as they age. And I remember sitting in the lecture theatres listening to this stuff, and it didn't make sense to me that this would be the case. However, it certainly, I never piped up and challenged any of the lecturers or professors over this. It was just a thought that went round in my brain, and I accepted that. Although it doesn't make sense, why would we evolve to have disease like this? I know we age and we have to pop off our mortal coil to let the to actually for that process of evolution. But I didn't see that we automatically had to have diseases that started when we were younger and healthy. So I managed to kind of push that to one side and then carried on. And then when I was a practitioner and a new enthusiastic GP, and I kind of thought, well, I know my stuff. And I went into general practice, determined to provide the best possible care. And I'd seen when I was working as a junior doctor in hospital that some patients would come in and they didn't seem to have had the best possible care prior to their admission. So I was determined to make a difference. So off I started. And I remember in the first couple of years, it was a real shock to me, a particular patient who over the course of 4 to 6 months just deteriorated before my eyes. He was on all the best treatments. I thought, maybe I'm missing something. So I talked to colleagues, talked to some specialists. Yes, this guy is on the latest and best treatment that we had, and yet still went downhill. And then I realised I had to accept that as well, that we couldn't stop this stuff. So that's something on type 2 diabetes, and Jim is going to be delving into type 2 diabetes in much more detail towards the end of the evening. But those two paragraphs, that one on the left, that comes from an article in the BMJ, British Medical Journal, one of the bigger journals, international, in 2017. And I put it in because that description of diabetes is one that would be largely accepted. It's actually recently challenged in a subsequent article this year, and it should be, in my view. That word in bold, progressive, is, I assert, not correct. It appears to be progressive because we've got our looking at the trees and not seeing the wood approach, and with that sort of reductionist approach, we understand the processes of diabetes, which is outlined in this here, and this is taken from a magazine article written by some researchers from Australia who had done some research in diabetes, and they were invited to write for an article for a magazine. I can't remember what magazine it was, but Peter asked me to write a response to this in Whole Food Living. And I think most GPs or most doctors would read this and just say, yeah. However, type 2 diabetes, which typically develops after the age of 40, and now is developing earlier than age 40, which never happened when I was training, is usually due to a combination, and no, it isn't. That's not the cause of diabetes, that's the process in the body That's the symptoms of the problem, and the problem is what we put in our mouths, the fact that we sit too much, and various other things which lead to this insulin resistance. And these two statements are a result I'm putting to you of this of our reductionist approach, and the fact that we make this disease real. So this becomes reality, and it's only a metaphor for looking at the reality, and that allows us to look at it in a different way, which I'm going to suggest would be in our best interest to do. So a quick look at medication versus nutrition. Now, medication involves a lot of clever people looking at specific pathways in the body, where we get down to biochemistry usually, because we regard the body as a walking kind of biochemical lab almost. As I'm talking to you, there's a massive number of reactions going on in my body, and we have elucidated quite a lot of them. We can pick certain ones that go wrong when these diseases come along, and we can interrupt those mechanisms with medication. So it's very specific, and you can see the nature of the approach, and it controls rather than cures these chronic conditions. Now, I was lucky to be part of a research team that looked at harms in general practice a few years ago, and recently published this year in the British Journal of General Practice. And we see that roughly 10% of patients will suffer some sort of harm from medication use in New Zealand primary care. Now, just over 3/4 of these harms are minor. So a bit of a transient rash, loose motions, maybe feeling a bit sick. Nothing much, over in a few days. However, just under 1/4, of course, are moderate or severe, which have a bit more of an impact on us. Some of them may result in a hospitalisation, and sometimes we even die as a result of the medications, despite best possible care. Hospital figures tend to be worse in this regard. And usually in these circumstances, we actually have to treat a significant number of people for one person to benefit, called numbers needed to treat. So let's have a look at nutrition. So whole food plant-based nutrition, it can reverse or even cure the disease in question by removing one of the main disease drivers. It results in health improvements irrespective of the impact on the disease in question. So if I went whole food plant-based for, let's say I had rheumatoid arthritis, I wanted to reduce the inflammation in my body, even if it made minimal impact on that rheumatoid arthritis, it's going to do things like improve my circulation to my heart, it's going to lower my HbA1c, which is an indicator of diabetes, going to improve the blood flow to my brain, going to improve my kidneys, etc., etc. So, and I'm going to feel good while I'm eating this way too. So only positive benefits. Minimal, if any, side effects, and the side effects are basically wind. And once you get used to eating the increase in fibre and your gut bacteria have had a chance to adjust, and you're feeding the healthy ones when you give them the fibre-containing foods, that side effect tends to drop away. The biggest risk that I can see is that if you've got a pre-existing condition, as you improve it, the improvement might be so dramatic that very quickly you need to alter your level of medication. So it's important that if you do this and you are on medication, let's say something to lower your blood pressure or something that actually lowers your blood sugar, that you make the change in concert with your physician so that they can adjust the medication. Okay, which is really what you want to happen, because in the end, if you want, if possible, to be off medication, and that is possible for some people, not necessarily everybody, but it can definitely make a difference. So why aren't we using whole food plant-based nutrition in medicine now? Well, here's a couple of quotes. This one is from, I think, an economist. So lots of people get busy with the proof. And remember, this sits outside the model. This is Tolstoy. I think he says it incredibly well. And just remember that doctors are clever people. And they're naturally a conservative bunch. We have to be a conservative bunch as doctors to to stay on the straight and narrow of following the evidence. So we tend to be reluctant to see things from outside our kind of medical perspective, because if we stray off into that arena too often, we're more likely to make errors. However, that can be a disadvantage. So why aren't we using whole food plant-based nutrition now? It's outside our current medical frame of reference. And we also, if it's in our frame of reference, we impose our own beliefs and values onto our patients, namely these three. And none of them are true. It's too extreme. Well, actually, I think it's more extreme to carry on eating the pies, the pork belly sandwiches, etc., and have heart disease, or to have the contribute to your diabetes along with all the sugary drinks and processed foods and junk that's on sale masquerading as food in our stores today. And it's certainly not too hard either. And I've got some quotes from people about that. And people think it's not healthy because it doesn't have the stuff that we learnt as kids that we told was healthy. Actually, it is healthy, extremely healthy. So I can't think of any other way that would beat it. It's not necessarily the only healthy way. You might be able to get away, if you're already well, with some animal foods round the edges, but that's literally as far as it goes. So back to whole food, plant-based nutrition and disease. Now, a few years ago, my wife, lovely wife, said to me, Martyn, I think we should stop eating meat, sugar and milk. And experienced and wise husband that I am, I knew better than to argue. So when I picked my jaw up off the floor, I muttered something which I thought might be taken as a positive encouragement, thinking, oh God, 2 weeks of carrot sticks, lettuce leaves and a bit of celery, she'll crack before I do, and we'll go back to eating normally, fingers crossed. And then she said, you know, I inquired politely, why, darling? So she said, watch this DVD, and it was a documentary called Forks Over Knives. And when I watched that documentary, I saw this guy that Grant's mentioned and that Evie will be talking about in more detail, Caldwell Esselstyn, talking about the patients with coronary artery disease, what we call ischemic heart disease, the biggest killer of people in New Zealand at the moment, just got its nose in front still of cancer. Actually curing these people. And I saw him talking to and working with a group of 12 patients who, when he got them, were so ill with ischemic heart disease, they were beyond having coronary artery bypass surgery, or they'd already had it. They were beyond having stents. Their life expectancy was 5 years or less. Now, we saw these patients on video, I think it was 12 years later, all happy, bar one, and that one didn't make it because he didn't stick to the diet. All the others who did were happy, well, and there, which is the important thing. And I thought, blimey, I'd heard about this in the 90s, because I'd heard it on the radio that someone was actually curing heart disease with nutrition. And I don't think it was Esselstyn, I think it was a guy called Dean Ornish who's actually done a trial that was published in The Lancet. And I remember thinking, it'll be really interesting when this comes out, won't it? And then forgot about it, and of course it never came out. And so I thought, I'm going to have to check this out, because if this is at all true, I'm ethically obliged to let people know. So I went to the literature and learnt that it was true. It is possible. It's not necessarily a guarantee. However, people in New Zealand at the moment are dying from heart disease, or they're getting heart disease, and they're not being informed that this option is available, and I think that's something that has to change. It has to change if our health service is to survive in its current form. It has to change for type 2 diabetes. It has to change for all of these things. We have to empower the folk in New Zealand to get their hands on the driving wheel of their own health. So similar for type 2 diabetes, there's trials, controlled trials showing this, and Jim was going to go into stuff in a bit more detail. Overweight and obesity, we have a trial in New Zealand that shows an 11 kilogram mean weight loss amongst a group of people from the Gisborne area, low socioeconomic area, the last people you would think who could adjust to whole food plant-based nutrition. And just heard at the weekend about at least a couple of those who are still going strong on their nutrition without any input from anybody else. It just made such a difference to them. I know someone who living in Dunedin at the moment who has cured, if you like, their Crohn's disease through eating whole food plant-based nutrition, and there's a gastroenterologist in England at the moment doing some research on this. So evidence is going to be building up for these other ones, and I talked a little bit about that menopause trial. So I thought I'd second to last slide. Now this is Thomas Edison, rather prescient, isn't it? So this is from quite some time ago. I'm not sure how long ago it was that he made this statement, but he's certainly not around now. And it's time we all became doctors of the future, in my view. Now this is some comments from some patients who have been doing a complete health improvement program with Liz and I over the last couple of months in central Otago. They all have type 2 diabetes. So quite a few of them have ischemic heart disease at the same time. So I think out of a group of 15, there was only one person who had just type 2 diabetes. Everybody else had another disease on that list. And we did a survey at 4 weeks, and one of the questions we asked them was, what would you say to someone else with type 2 diabetes about this? And here's what they had to say. So I hope we've got some parachutes open in the audience tonight. That's it. Thank you very much.
What's your view on coconut oils, coconut yogurts, those sort of things?
My view on coconut, did you say?
Yeah, coconut, yeah.
There's not such a lot of evidence around that I'm aware of around coconut. I understand it's been marketed as a health food. There's quite a lot of fat content in it, so we suggest to people to minimise the use of coconut. I certainly wouldn't use coconut oil, and be careful with coconut milks, and not to have a lot of them because of that fat content. And the fat is saturated fat, mostly in coconut. That may have a different effect on the body than the saturated fat in animal foods, but I would go cautiously with that. So on the whole, coconut oil, avoid if you can.
One last question. Done back, sorry.
This might seem like a bit of a leading question, but would you say that the reluctance that GPs and so on have to prescribing a whole food diet is because they don't want to be seen to be activists? They're pushing something that relates in ways to morality?
Well,
how people live their lives and being critical of their lifestyle?
Yeah, I think the evidence from lifestyle medicine, which is where doctors and practitioners will talk to patients about lifestyle changes, shows that if you're a practitioner who's not actually embodying the change, you're much less likely to mention it. So that's out there in the literature. And then I think those three reasons that I showed earlier. So I've talked to quite a number of practitioners, and we presented at the college conference for 2 years running on whole food plant-based nutrition. People will regard it as hard for patients to do. And it's a surprise, the effect that those patients, how easy it is for the patients in Central Otago. That's the experience of people who make the switch. So in a lot of doctors' minds, it's too hard. It's a bit extreme, you know, a bit extreme, isn't it? However, I think it's actually, knowing this, it's colossally extreme, if you like, to leave people eating the wrong foods that are actually making them sick in the first place. And there is that sort of activist type thing. So I know in the practice that I worked at, although no one ever spoke to me about it, that, Martyn's extreme over this. Now, I don't tell people to eat whole food plant-based. I've given up telling people what to do because it doesn't work. Okay? Aside from, I try it with Liz on a regular basis, but it definitely doesn't work there. But I still keep knocking my head against the brick wall. But what I say to patients is, you might be interested in this. I've come across something that could work for you. Are you interested in curing your disease or reversing it? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you might want to watch Forks Over Knives. Conversation's taken a minute or two. I have to summon up the courage to mention it to people, in case they think I'm, wondering what sort of angle I'm coming from. I found that most people have changed just with that. I haven't had to do anything else. I've said, if you want to make the change, to come back and have a chat with me. Everybody who's done it has made the change and then come back and told me they've done it, thank you very much, and why didn't I tell them about it earlier? Like that.
Yeah, that's what I said too. Thank you, Martyn.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. Make sure you subscribe and share this podcast with your friends, and visit the website for more details.